to Stay Invisible. Chapter 6. Good morning, Raymond, Miss Marcus said. She was standing by the cafeteria breakfast line as Raymond served himself toast and eggs. How was your Thanksgiving? It was all right, he responded, trying not to make eye contact. He had spent the entire day on Sunday letting his body recover from illness, and he still didn't feel totally back to normal. I wasn't feeling well, he said absent-mindedly. He was trying to decide if he should get a carton of milk or a bottle of water. His brain told him he needed the calories, but his stomach wasn't so sure. Miss Marcus must have noticed. Grab the milk, she said. I have bottles of water in my classroom. I'll put one in your cubby. Thanks, he said as he set the carton of milk on his tray. You're sure you're not still sick? She asked. You look a little fishy. The word fishy was too much for Raymond, and he let out a laugh. But it jerked his stomach muscles, and he immediately stopped. Sheesh, kid, Miss Marcus said. You better go put something in that stomach. He nodded and made his way to an empty table where he ate his breakfast slowly. Raymond checked his cubby before homeroom, and in it, he found a bottle of water and a little Gatorade packet. He smiled and poured the powder into the water. He took a sip and instantly felt better. He wanted to thank Miss Marcus, but she was busy shuffling students to their seats to begin the day. Raymond had stopped counting how many schools he had attended. Aside from being set further from town, River Mill was no different from the rest. He had long since learned how to fly under the radar, had to stay invisible. He sat alone at lunch, usually reading or studying. He did not raise his hand in class if he could help it. He knew there would always be kids who wanted attention, and there would always be others who were more than happy to give it to them. Raymond was neither. He did his work. He kept his mouth shut. This was how he had survived the children's home, and this was how he had survived school after school. Except there was one class in which Raymond was not as invisible as he would have liked. In art class, his new friend Harlon was the opposite of invisible. He talked non-stop and was overly obsessed with cars. Most kids shook off their obsession with race cars before middle school, but not Harlon. And since he had lived in Rivermill his whole life, all the kids knew who he was and knew how he was. He was loud. He talked with his mouth full and quite often without thinking first. Harlon attracted unwanted attention. And he was downright determined to be Raymond's friend. Raymond was finding it harder and harder to ignore him. You ever been to Hillsboro? Harlon asked Raymond. He was cutting out a Maserati from a magazine ad and accidentally clipped a tree. Dang it, he shouted. I heard they got a racetrack in Hillsboro, so that is so far back in the woods, you have to walk for a mile to get to it. Best kept secret for drag racers and racing rings. You ever heard of it? A racing ring is an illegal group of racers that bet money on racers and switch locations to avoid the police. Harlon pronounced it police, like it was two different words. Raymond was cutting out trees and he gave in. How did the cars get there? He asked. What do you mean? They drive in, Harlon answered, rolling his eyes. Don't you know how a car works? No, yes, I know how a car works. I meant, if it's back in the woods and you have to walk a mile to get to it, then how did they get the cars there? He glued a tree to his paper. Harlon looked stumped for a moment and then said, choppers. They chopper them in and drop them down on the track. Wouldn't the police notice if helicopters were carrying cars over the woods? They do it at night, said Harlon without missing a beat. Raymond quit trying. See you tomorrow, Harlon said to Raymond at the end of class. See ya, Raymond said. He milled around the crowd of kids at the bus lot and slipped into the woods unnoticed. The dumpsters opened up a whole new world for Raymond. He had a food supply now, beyond what he could save from the cafeteria. But it required good timing on his part. He had to wait until dark, and he couldn't seem to get the trash schedule down. That first week after finding the hollow, he either got there right after the trucks had emptied the dumpsters or way too late to find anything edible. Fish were also hard to come by. He had gone fishing almost every day and hadn't caught a single thing since that first brim. It had only been a short time, but Rosie was already visibly losing weight. After science class the next day, Mr. Rosen asked Raymond to stay and help him clean up a lab before he went to lunch. Raymond carried the contents of the lab back to the supplies closet and stowed the boxes on the shelves. Oh, his stomach was growling, and he was eager to get to the cafeteria. Will you put that trash can back in the staff restroom on your way out? Mr. Rosen asked, pointing to the small can by the door. Yes, sir, Raymond said. He picked up the trash can and left the room. He opened the door to the staff restroom, flipped on the light, and set the trash can under the sink. He glanced in the mirror and turned to leave. There, on the sink, was an almost new bar of soap. Raymond hesitated. Then he wrapped the soap in a paper towel and tucked it in his bag. He hurried from the bathroom and checked the hall. It was empty. He exhaled and made his way to the cafeteria for lunch. That afternoon, he stood on the sandy bank of the river trying again to catch a fish. He had used every lure in his tackle box and nothing seemed to make a difference. Rosie was splashing around trying to catch a minnow from a small school in the shallow water. Raymond thought he felt a tug on the line, but it was a false alarm. He had just made up his mind to quit for the day when he noticed a dead minnow floating near Rosie. Rosie noticed too and began pawing at the minnow. She quickly got bored with this and abandoned the water altogether, deciding to take a nap in the sand. Raymond set his fishing pole down and scooped up the tiny fish. There was no way he could eat another scavenged fish. But another fish thought might. It was worth a shot, he thought. He pulled the line and cut the lure. He added weights and fastened a cork. Then he carefully secured the minnow to the hook. He cast the line and waited. After a few minutes, he thought he felt a nibble. He reeled in the line. The minnow was still on the hook, so he cast again. Finally, he felt the tug he had been waiting for, and he jerked the line, setting the hook in the fish's mouth. He reeled in a small catfish, and Rosie danced at Raymond's feet. So that was it. He couldn't fool these river fish with his lures. He must have just gotten lucky before. He walked to the edge of the water. There were a few more minnows swimming close to the bank. He tried to catch one, grabbing at the water, then felt silly. Of course he couldn't catch a minnow like that. He tried inching his hand through the water slowly. They were just too fast. He needed a net. That night, he and Rosie had catfish for dinner. It barely curbed his hunger, but it was better than nothing. It was another cold night, and Raymond stayed by the fire until he ran out of sticks. Then he crawled into the cold hollow, holding his growling stomach. He tossed and turned, trying to ignore his hunger pains. He attempted to keep his mind occupied by thinking of ways he could make a net, but the cold kept winning out, and he couldn't think clearly. The next morning, Raymond woke up to a frost-covered earth, and any thoughts of nets and fishing were pushed aside for thoughts of warmth. He shivered and cupped his hands to his face, trying to breathe life back into his stiff fingers. He had made his last gum wrapper fire the night before. Raymond sat through his classes thinking about how he could get a lighter or a box of matches, but he knew that he would have to walk into town to get either. and he didn't have any money. He needed more chewing gum wrappers. He tried looking through the trash, but Miss Marcus had caught him in the act. And although Raymond made up a story about accidentally throwing away his pencil, he wasn't sure Miss Marcus believed him. He couldn't risk anyone seeing him rummaging through the trash during the school day. In art, Harlon was raving on and on about his dad taking him to Commerce for his birthday in January when Raymond blurted out, "My birthday's tomorrow." It was a lie. Raymond's birthday was in June, but Harlon didn't know that. "Well, shoot," said Harlon, unbothered by the interruption. "Your folks having a party or something?" Harlon had never been invited to a birthday party before, despite his many years of trying. Raymond's parents had never really celebrated birthdays, except to remind him of how lucky he was to have 2 parents and a roof over his head. Not so lucky now, Raymond thought. "Nah," said Raymond. "I'll probably just go fishing or something." "Well, what can I get you for your birthday?" asked Harlon. "Friend's got to give his best buddy a birthday present." The phrase, "best buddy," weighed heavy on Raymond, and he felt guilty for lying. But it was getting cold, and he was running out of options. "I don't need much," said Raymond. "Maybe just a few packs of chewing gum." He tried to avoid Harlon's eyes. "Shoot, I'll do one better than that," Harlon said happily. After school, Raymond headed back to the river, thinking again of minnows and catfish. He tried to use one of his t-shirts to scoop the minnows up, but the shirt was too heavy in the water and the minnows were too fast. He searched the woods for something that he could use to make a net. He found an old car tire, a flip-flop, and some empty soda bottles. He left the tire but picked up the sandal and the bottles to throw away later. He needed the minnows to catch a fish, but all he kept finding was trash. He slept uneasily, hungry, and shivering against the cold. The next day, Harlon brought Raymond a big bag of candy full of large size chocolate bars, packs of sweet tarts, and at least 10 packs of chewing gum. "Happy birthday," he said, thrusting the overflowing bag into Raymond's arms. "My gran works night shifts sometimes at the shop and save and gets to bring home the expired candy. But don't worry," he added. "It's still good. I eat it all the time." "Thank you, Harlon," said Raymond. And Harlon grinned so big that Raymond thought the shame would eat him alive.